Chapter 10, Part 2 of The Monk, a Romance. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Recording by James K. White. The Monk, a Romance by Matthew Gregory Lewis. Chapter 10, Part 2. The nuns clasped their hands together and sank upon their knees. Lorenzo looked round him eagerly, and was on the point of yielding to the fears which already had possessed the women. Universal silence prevailed. He examined the vault, but nothing was to be seen. He now prepared to address the nuns and ridiculed their childish apprehensions, when his attention was arrested by a deep and long-drawn groan. "What was that?" he cried, and started. "There, Señor," said Helena, "now you must be convinced. You have heard the noise yourself. Now judge whether our terrors are imaginary. Since we have been here, that groaning has been repeated almost every 5 minutes. Doubtless it proceeds from some soul in pain, who wishes to be prayed out of purgatory. But none of us dare ask it the question. As for me, were I to see an apparition, the fright, I am very certain, would kill me out of hand." As she said this, a second groan was heard, yet more distinctly. The nuns crossed themselves and hastened to repeat their prayers against evil spirits. Lorenzo listened attentively. He even thought that he could distinguish sounds, as of one speaking in complaint, but distance rendered them inarticulate. The noise seemed to come from the midst of the small vault in which he and the nuns then were, and which a multitude of passages, branching out in various directions, formed into a sort of star. Lorenzo's curiosity, which was ever awake, made him anxious to solve this mystery. He desired that silence might be kept. The nuns obeyed him. All was hushed, till the general stillness was again disturbed by the groaning, which was repeated several times successively. He perceived it to be most audible when, upon following the sound, he was conducted close to the shrine of St. Clare. "The noise comes from hence," said he. "Whose is this statue?" Helena, to whom he addressed the question, paused for a moment. Suddenly she clapped her hands together. "Ay," cried she, "it must be so. I have discovered the meaning of these groans." The nuns crowded round her, and besought her eagerly to explain herself. She gravely replied that for time immemorial the statue had been famous for performing miracles. From this she inferred that the saint was concerned at the conflagration of a convent which she protected, and expressed her grief by audible lamentations. Not having equal faith in the miraculous saint, Lorenzo did not think this solution of the mystery quite so satisfactory as the nuns, who subscribed to it without hesitation. In one point, 'tis true, that he agreed with Helena. He suspected that the groans proceeded from the statue. The more he listened, the more was he confirmed in this idea. He drew nearer to the image, designing to inspect it more closely. But perceiving his intention, the nuns besought him for God's sake to desist, since if he touched the statue, his death was inevitable. "And in what consists the danger?" said he. "Mother of God, in what?" replied Helena, ever eager to relate a miraculous adventure. "If you had only heard the 100th part of those marvellous stories about this statue, which the domina used to recount. She assured us often and often that if we only dared to lay a finger upon it, we might expect the most fatal consequences. Among other things, she told us that a robber having entered these vaults by night, he observed yonder ruby, whose value is inestimable. Do you see it, Señor? It sparkles upon the third finger of the hand in which she holds a crown of thorns. This jewel naturally excited the villain's cupidity. He resolved to make himself master of it. For this purpose he ascended the pedestal. He supported himself by grasping the saint's right arm, and extended his own towards the ring. What was his surprise when he saw the statue's hand raised in a posture of menace, and heard her lips pronounce his eternal perdition. Penetrated with awe and consternation, he desisted from his attempt and prepared to quit the sepulchre. In this he also failed. Flight was denied him. He found it impossible to disengage the hand which rested upon the right arm of the statue. In vain did he struggle. He remained fixed to the image, till the insupportable and fiery anguish which darted itself through his veins compelled his shrieking for assistance. The sepulchre was now filled with spectators. The villain confessed his sacrilege, and was only released by the separation of his hand from his body. It has remained ever since fastened to the image. The robber turned hermit, and led ever after an exemplary life. But yet the saint's decree was performed, and tradition says that he continues to haunt this sepulchre, and implores St. Clare's pardon with groans and lamentations. Now I think of it, those which we have just heard may very possibly have been uttered by the ghost of this sinner, but of this I will not be positive. All that I can say is, that since that time no one has ever dared to touch the statue. Then do not be foolhardy, good Señor. For the love of heaven, give up your design, nor expose yourself unnecessarily to certain destruction. Not being convinced that this destruction would be so certain as Helena seemed to think, Lorenzo persisted in his resolution. The nuns besought him to desist, in piteous terms, and even pointed out the robber's hand, which was in effect still visible upon the arm of the statue. This proof, as they imagined, must convince him. It was very far from doing so, and they were greatly scandalized when he declared his suspicion that the dried and shriveled fingers had been placed there by order of the prioress. In spite of their prayers and threats, he approached the statue. He sprang over the iron rails which defended it, and the saint underwent a thorough examination. The image at first appeared to be of stone, but proved on further inspection to be formed of no more solid materials than colored wood. He shook it and attempted to move it, but it appeared to be of a piece with the base which it stood upon. He examined it over and over. Still no clue guided him to the solution of this mystery, for which the nuns were become equally solicitous when they saw that he touched the statue with impunity. He paused and listened. The groans were repeated at intervals, and he was convinced of being in the spot nearest to them. He mused upon this singular event, and ran over the statue with inquiring eyes. Suddenly they rested upon the shriveled hand. It struck him that so particular an injunction was not given without cause, not to touch the arm of the image. He again ascended the pedestal. He examined the object of his attention, and discovered a small knob of iron concealed between the saint's shoulder and what was supposed to have been the hand of the robber. This observation delighted him. He applied his fingers to the knob and pressed it down forcibly. Immediately a rumbling noise was heard within the statue, as if a chain tightly stretched was flying back. Startled at the sound, the timid nuns started away, prepared to hasten from the vault at the first appearance of danger. All remaining quiet and still, they again gathered round Lorenzo, and beheld his proceedings with anxious curiosity. Finding that nothing followed this discovery, he descended. As he took his hand from the saint, she trembled beneath his touch. This created new terrors in the spectators, who believed the statue to be animated. Lorenzo's ideas upon the subject were widely different. He easily comprehended that the noise which he had heard was occasioned by his having loosened a chain which attached the image to its pedestal. He once more attempted to move it, and succeeded without much exertion. He placed it upon the ground, and then perceived the pedestal to be hollow, and covered at the opening with a heavy iron grate. This excited such general curiosity that the sisters forgot both their real and imaginary dangers. Lorenzo proceeded to raise the grate, in which the nuns assisted him to the utmost of their strength. The attempt was accomplished with little difficulty. A deep abyss now presented itself before them, whose thick obscurity the eye strove in vain to pierce. The rays of the lamp were too feeble to be of much assistance. Nothing was discernible save a flight of rough unshapen steps, which sank into the yawning gulf, and were soon lost in darkness. The groans were heard no more, but all believed them to have ascended from this cavern. As he bent over it, Lorenzo fancied that he distinguished something bright twinkling through the gloom. He gazed attentively upon the spot where it showed itself, and was convinced that he saw a small spark of light, now visible, now disappearing. He communicated this circumstance to the nuns. They also perceived the spark, but when he declared his intention to descend into the cave, they united to oppose his resolution. All their remonstrances could not prevail on him to alter it. None of them had courage enough to accompany him, neither could he think of depriving them of the lamp. Alone, therefore, and in darkness, he prepared to pursue his design, while the nuns were contented to offer up prayers for his success and safety. The steps were so narrow and uneven that to descend them was like walking down the side of a precipice. The obscurity by which he was surrounded rendered his footing insecure. He was obliged to proceed with great caution, lest he should miss the steps and fall into the gulf below him. This he was several times on the point of doing. However, he arrived sooner upon solid ground than he had expected. He now found that the thick darkness and impenetrable mists which reigned through the cavern had deceived him into the belief of its being much more profound than it proved upon inspection. He reached the foot of the stairs unhurt. He now stopped and looked round for the spark which had before caught his attention. He sought in vain. All was dark and gloomy. He listened for the groans, but his ear caught no sound except the distant murmur of the nuns above, as in low voices they repeated their Ave Marias. He stood irresolute to which side he should address his steps. At all events, he determined to proceed. He did so but slowly, fearful lest, instead of approaching, he should be retiring from the object of his search. The groans seemed to announce one in pain, or at least in sorrow, and he hoped to have the power of relieving the mourner's calamities. A plaintive tone, sounding at no great distance, at length reached his hearing. He bent his course joyfully towards it. It became more audible as he advanced, and he soon beheld again the spark of light, which a low projecting wall had hitherto concealed from him. It proceeded from a small lamp which was placed on a heap of stones, and whose faint and melancholy rays served rather to point out than dispel the horrors of a narrow gloomy dungeon, formed in one side of the cavern. It also showed several other recesses of similar construction, but whose depth was buried in obscurity. Coldly played the light upon the damp walls, whose dew-stained surface gave back a feeble reflection. A thick and pestilential fog clouded the height of the vaulted dungeon. As Lorenzo advanced, he felt a piercing chillness spread itself through his veins. The frequent groans still engaged him to move forwards. He turned towards them, and by the lamp's glimmering beams beheld, in a corner of this loathsome abode, a creature stretched upon a bed of straw, so wretched, so emaciated, so pale, that he doubted to think her a woman. She was half naked. Her long dishevelled hair fell in disorder over her face and almost entirely concealed it. One wasted arm hung listlessly upon a tattered rug, which covered her convulsed and shivering limbs. The other was wrapped round a small bundle, and held it closely to her bosom. A large rosary lay near her. Opposite to her was a crucifix on which she bent her sunk eyes fixedly, and by her side stood a basket and a small earthen pitcher. Lorenzo stopped. He was petrified with horror. He gazed upon the miserable object with disgust and pity. He trembled at the spectacle. He grew sick at heart. His strength failed him, and his limbs were unable to support his weight. He was obliged to lean against the low wall which was near him, unable to go forward or to address the sufferer. She cast her eyes towards the staircase. The wall concealed Lorenzo, and she observed him not. "No one comes," she at length murmured. As she spoke, her voice was hollow, and rattled in her throat. She sighed bitterly. "No one comes," she repeated. "No, they have forgotten me. They will come no more." She paused for a moment, then continued mournfully, 2 days, 2 long, long days, and yet no food, and yet no hope, no comfort. Foolish woman, how can I wish to lengthen a life so wretched? Yet such a death! O God, to perish by such a death! To linger out such ages in torture! Till now I knew not what it was to hunger. Hark! No, no one comes. They will come no more. She was silent. She shivered and drew the rug over her naked shoulders. I am very cold. I am still unused to the damps of this dungeon. 'Tis strange, but no matter, colder shall I soon be, and yet not feel it. I shall be cold, cold as thou art. She looked at the bundle which lay upon her breast. She bent over it and kissed it, then drew back hastily and shuddered with disgust. It was once so sweet. It would have been so lovely, so like him. I have lost it forever. How a few days have changed it! I should not know it again myself. Yet it is dear to me. God, how dear! I will forget what it is. I will only remember what it was, and love it as well as when it was sweet, so lovely, so like him. I thought that I had wept away all my tears, but here is one still lingering. She wiped her eyes with a tress of her hair. She put out her hand for the pitcher and reached it with difficulty. She cast into it a look of hopeless inquiry. She sighed and replaced it upon the ground. Quite a void, not a drop, not one drop left to cool my scorched up, burning palate. Now would I give treasures for a draught of water, and they are God's servants who make me suffer thus. They think themselves holy, while they torture me like fiends. They are cruel and unfeeling, and 'tis they who bid me repent, and 'tis they who threaten me with eternal perdition. Saviour, Saviour, you think not so. She again fixed her eyes upon the crucifix, took her rosary, and, while she told her beads, the quick motion of her lips declared her to be praying with fervency. While he listened to her melancholy accents, Lorenzo's sensibility became yet more violently affected. The first sight of such misery had given a sensible shock to his feelings, but that being past, he now advanced towards the captive. She heard his steps, and, uttering a cry of joy, dropped the rosary. "Hark! Hark! Hark!" she cried. "Some one comes." She strove to raise herself, but her strength was unequal to the attempt. She fell back, and as she sank again upon the bed of straw, Lorenzo heard the rattling of heavy chains. He still approached, while the prisoner thus continued: "Is it you, Camilla? You are come then at last. Oh, it was time. I thought that you had forsaken me, that I was doomed to perish of hunger. Give me to drink, Camilla, for pity's sake. I am faint with long fasting, and grown so weak that I cannot raise myself from the ground. Good Camilla, give me to drink, lest I expire before you." Fearing that surprise in her enfeebled state might be fatal, Lorenzo was at a loss how to address her. "It is not Camilla," said he at length, speaking in a slow and gentle voice. "Who is it then?" replied the sufferer. "Alix, perhaps, or Violante? My eyes are grown so dim and feeble that I cannot distinguish your features. But whichever it is, if your breast is sensible of the least compassion, if you are not more cruel than wolves and tigers, take pity on my sufferings. You know that I am dying for want of sustenance. This is the 3rd day since these lips have received nourishment. Do you bring me food, or come you only to announce my death and learn how long I have yet to exist in agony?" "You mistake my business," replied Lorenzo. "I am no emissary of the cruel prioress. I pity your sorrows, and come hither to relieve them." "To relieve them?" repeated the captive. "Said you to relieve them?" At the same time, starting from the ground, and supporting herself upon her hands, she gazed upon the stranger earnestly. "Great God! Is it no illusion? A man! Speak! Who are you? What brings you hither? Come you to save me? To restore me to liberty, to life and light? Oh, speak! Speak quickly, lest I encourage a hope whose disappointment will destroy me." "Be calm," replied Lorenzo in a voice soothing and compassionate. "The domina, of whose cruelty you complain, has already paid the forfeit of her offences. You have nothing more to fear from her. A few minutes will restore you to liberty, and the embraces of your friends from whom you have been secluded. You may rely upon my protection. Give me your hand, and be not fearful. Let me conduct you where you may receive those attentions which your feeble state requires." "Oh, yes, yes, yes!" cried the prisoner, with an exulting shriek. "There is God, then, and a just one. Joy, joy! I shall once more breathe the fresh air, and view the light of the glorious sunbeams. I will go with you, stranger, I will go with you. Oh, heaven will bless you for pitying an unfortunate. But this, too, must go with me," she added, pointing to the small bundle which she still clasped to her bosom. "I cannot part with this. I will bear it away. It shall convince the world how dreadful are the abodes so falsely termed religious. Good stranger, lend me your hand to rise. I am faint with want and sorrow and sickness, and my strength has quite forsaken me. So, that is well." As Lorenzo stooped to raise her, the beams of the lamp struck full upon his face. "Almighty God!" she exclaimed. "Is it possible? That look! Those features! Oh, yes, it is, it is!" She extended her arms to throw them round him, but her enfeebled frame was unable to sustain the emotions which agitated her bosom. She fainted, and again sank upon the bed of straw. Lorenzo was surprised at her last exclamation. He thought that he had before heard such accents as her hollow voice had just formed, but where he could not remember. He saw that in her dangerous situation immediate physical aid was absolutely necessary, and he hastened to convey her from the dungeon. He was at first prevented from doing so by a strong chain fastened round the prisoner's body and fixing her to the neighboring wall. However, his natural strength being aided by anxiety to relieve the unfortunate, he soon forced out the staple to which one end of the chain was attached. Then, taking the captive in his arms, he bent his course towards the staircase. The rays of the lamp above, as well as the murmur of female voices, guided his steps. He gained the stairs, and in a few minutes after arrived at the iron grate. The nuns, during his absence, had been terribly tormented by curiosity and apprehension. They were equally surprised and delighted on seeing him suddenly emerge from the cave. Every heart was filled with compassion for the miserable creature whom he bore in his arms. While the nuns, and Virginia in particular, employed themselves in striving to recall her to her senses, Lorenzo related in few words the manner of his finding her. He then observed to them that by this time the tumult must have been quelled, and that he could now conduct them to their friends without danger. All were eager to quit the sepulchre. Still, to prevent all possibility of ill usage, they besought Lorenzo to venture out first alone and examine whether the coast was clear. With this request he complied. Helena offered to conduct him to the staircase, and they were on the point of departing when a strong light flashed from several passages upon the adjacent walls. At the same time, steps were heard of people approaching hastily, and whose number seemed to be considerable. The nuns were greatly alarmed at this circumstance. They supposed their retreat to be discovered, and the rioters to be advancing in pursuit of them. Hastily quitting the prisoner, who remained insensible, they crowded round Lorenzo, and claimed his promise to protect them. Virginia alone forgot her own danger by striving to relieve the sorrows of another. She supported the sufferer's head upon her knees, bathing her temples with rose water, chafing her cold hands, and sprinkling her face with tears which were drawn from her by compassion. The strangers approaching nearer, Lorenzo was enabled to dispel the fears of the suppliants. His name, pronounced by a number of voices among which he distinguished the Duke's, pealed along the vaults, and convinced him that he was the object of their search. He communicated this intelligence to the nuns, who received it with rapture. A few moments after confirmed his idea. Don Ramirez, as well as the Duke, appeared, followed by attendants with torches. They had been seeking him through the vaults in order to let him know that the mob was dispersed, and the riot entirely over. Lorenzo recounted briefly his adventure in the cavern, and explained how much the unknown was in want of medical assistance. He besought the Duke to take charge of her, as well as of the nuns and pensioners. "As for me," said he, "other cares demand my attention. While you with one half of the archers convey these ladies to their respective homes, I wish the other half to be left with me. I will examine the cavern below, and pervade the most secret recesses of the sepulchre. I cannot rest till convinced that yonder wretched victim was the only one confined by superstition in these vaults." The Duke applauded his intention. Don Ramirez offered to assist him in his inquiry, and his proposal was accepted with gratitude. The nuns, having made their acknowledgments to Lorenzo, committed themselves to the care of his uncle, and were conducted from the sepulchre. Virginia requested that the unknown might be given to her in charge, and promised to let Lorenzo know, whenever she was sufficiently recovered to accept his visits. In truth, she made this promise more from consideration for herself than for either Lorenzo or the captive. She had witnessed his politeness, gentleness, and intrepidity with sensible emotion. She wished earnestly to preserve his acquaintance, and in addition to the sentiments of pity which the prisoner excited, she hoped that her attention to this unfortunate would raise her a degree in the esteem of Lorenzo. She had no occasion to trouble herself upon this head. The kindness already displayed by her, and the tender concern which she had shown for the sufferer, had gained her an exalted place in his good graces. While occupied in alleviating the captive's sorrows, the nature of her employment adorned her with new charms, and rendered her beauty 1,000 times more interesting. Lorenzo viewed her with admiration and delight. He considered her as a ministering angel descended to the aid of afflicted innocents, nor could his heart have resisted her attractions had it not been steeled by the remembrance of Antonia. The Duke now conveyed the nuns in safety to the dwellings of their respective friends. The rescued prisoner was still insensible, and gave no signs of life except by occasional groans. She was borne upon a sort of litter. Virginia, who was constantly on the side of it, was apprehensive that, exhausted by long abstinence, and shaken by the sudden change from bonds and darkness to liberty and light, her frame would never get the better of the shock. Lorenzo and Don Ramirez still remained in the sepulchre. After deliberating upon their proceedings, it was resolved that, to prevent losing time, the archers should be divided into 2 bodies; that with one Don Ramirez should examine the cavern, while Lorenzo, with the other, might penetrate into the further vaults. This being arranged, and his followers being provided with torches, Don Ramirez advanced to the cavern. He had already descended some steps when he heard people approaching hastily from the interior part of the sepulchre. This surprised him, and he quitted the cave precipitately. "Do you hear footsteps?" said Lorenzo. "Let us bend our course towards them. 'Tis from this side that they seem to proceed." At that moment a loud and piercing shriek induced him to quicken his steps. "Help! Help! For God's sake!" cried a voice whose melodious tone penetrated Lorenzo's heart with terror. He flew towards the cry with the rapidity of lightning, and was followed by Ramirez with equal swiftness. End of Chapter 10, Part 2. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista.